I'll begin by asking people to turn off their cell phones. Thank you, Daisy. All right. As Stacy Lizer of the Leaf Chronicle pointed out in her recent article, Zone 3 magazine has been a fixture on Austin Peay's campus since 1986, published twice annually by the Center for the Creative Arts. But in 2007, creative writing faculty and staff decided to enlarge the mission of publication, and Zone 3 Press and the first book awards were born. Austin Peay State University has the only press in the state of Tennessee, but I think there's one other, that publishes contemporary poetry. It's certainly the only university press that publishes contemporary poetry. Every other year, Zone 3 and the Center invite writers who have yet to publish a book of poems to submit their manuscripts. And over the course of several weeks, months really, we receive hundreds. Through a very thorough and complicated selection process, we narrow the pile down to 10 finalists. All of the finalists are deserving of publication, but most often one rises above the others. This year, our distinguished judge, Rigoberto González, singled out The Glass Crib, a manuscript by Amanda Auchter. To celebrate Amanda's debut reading from this collection of poems, we invited Rigoberto to read his work and introduce Amanda. We are so grateful to Rigoberto for doing such a splendid job, not only selecting such a fine manuscript, but for volunteering to work with the poet on the final edits of the manuscript and for writing the smart and thoughtful introduction. He says, "The journey to and out of the glass crib is a heartbreaking one, with moments of revelation and gravity that will take the reader's breath away. But this book will also be remembered for its countless lines of breathtaking beauty. Auchter shows enviable precision in orchestrating image and music, each poem a perfect sensory song." So I'm going to introduce Rigoberto, and he's going to read, and then he gets to introduce Amanda. Rigoberto González is the author of 3 poetry books. So Often the Pitcher Goes to Water Until It Breaks, a National Poetry Series selection, Other Fugitives and Other Strangers, winner of the San Francisco State University's Poetry Center Book Award, and most recently, Black Blossoms. His prose includes 2 bilingual children's picture books, the story collection Men Without Bliss, the novel Crossing Vines, winner of Forward Magazine's Fiction Book of the Year Award, the YA novel The Mariposa Club, a Rainbow List selection of the American Library Association, and The Butterfly Boy, Memories of a Chicano Mariposa, winner of the American Book Award from the Before Columbus Foundation. He also edited Camino del Sol, 15 Years of Latina and Latino Writing, and Aluvista's new and selected volume of poetry, Chicano Duende, a select anthology. The recent recipient of Guggenheim and NEA Fellowships and the Shelley Memorial Award from the Poetry Society of America, he is a contributing editor for the Poets and Writers magazine, on the executive board of directors of the National Book Critics Circle, and on the advisory circle of Continta, a collective of Chicano Latino activist writers. His book review column with the El Paso Times of Texas is now entering its 10th and final year. He's an associate professor of English at Rutgers, Newark, the State University of New Jersey. Please join me in welcoming Rigoberto González.
Thank you for coming. I need to lean on something. Such a pleasure to be here and being the opening act for Amanda and this book that I admire deeply. And I'll speak to you about that after this reading. I'm going to begin with a few poems, a few newer work. This poem is the last poem in my 4th collection. We're always way ahead. This 4th book will be out in 2 years. And it's called People of Eden. And I explored that theme in many ways, and one of those ways I explored it was through the loss of the home, and we certainly have seen that in this country, the loss of people's houses. This is called Casa, and there's enough bilingual faces in the room in order to translate Casa. I am not your mother. I will not be moved by the grief or gratitude of men who weep like orphans at my door. I am not a church. I do not answer prayers, but I never turn them down. Come in and kneel or sit or stand. The burden of your weight won't lessen, no matter the length of your admission. Tell me anything you want. I have to listen, but don't expect me to respond. When you tell me you have lost your job, or that your wife has found another love, or that your children took their laughter to another town. You feel alone and empty, color me surprised. I didn't notice they were gone. Despite the row of faces pinned like medals to my walls, I didn't earn them. The scratches on the wood are not my scars. If they're the smell, the spices in the air, blame the trickery of kitchens, or your sad addiction to the yesterdays that never keep, no matter how much you believe they will. I am not a time capsule. I do not value pithy things like locks of hair and milk teeth and ticket stubs and promise rings, mere particles of dust I blow out to the street if I could sneeze. Take your high school jersey and your woman's wedding dress away from me. Sentimental hoarding bothers me. So off with you, old couch that cries and coins as it gets dragged out to the porch. Farewell, cold bed that breaks its bones in protest to eviction or foreclosure or whatever launched this grim parade of exits. I am not a pet. I do not feel abandonment. Sometimes I do not even see you come or go or stay behind. My windows are your eyes, not mine. If you should die inside me, I'll leave it up to you to tell the neighbors. Shut the heaters off. I do not fear the cold. I am not the one who shrinks into the corner of the floor because whatever made you think this was a home with warmth isn't here to sweet talk anymore. Don't look at me that way. I'm not to blame. I granted nothing to the immigrant or exile that I didn't give the border crosser or a native born. I am not a prize or a wish come true. Wait, that was me? That was the house. I am not a prize or a wish come true. I am not a fairy tale castle, though I used to be in some distant land inhabited by dreamers now extinct. Who knows what happened there? In any case, good riddance, grotesque fantasy and mirth, so long, wall-to-wall disguise and vulgar suede and chintz. Take care, you fool, and don't forget that I am just a house, a structure without soul for those whose patron saints are longing and despair. Before this manuscript Black Losses became a book, I removed about 15 pages. And one of those poems that I chose to remove is the one I'm going to read to you now. And it's I do like to push the envelope of good taste in some of these pieces because I write about very sad things, tragedies, other kinds of sadnesses and loneliness. And I thought, you know, and this poem I thought went a little too far. And the reason I'm going to read it now is I'm actually practicing because this was reprinted in an anthology that just came out called the Murder Anthology. There's a whole anthology of poems about murder. Who knew? This is called Your Darling Matricide by Brazil. How now to convince your killer that his father did exist when the only photograph crumbled like a powdery moth at the textile factory fire 60 years ago? For 9 months, you carried 2 precious gifts in your apron, your only child and the picture of your lover, age 18, who vanished to the north. The day you gave birth, your apron burned, left behind before your journey to the midwife. And so the law of God, that one face replaced another, no matter. The pleasure that used to be your man now trickled down to meet your lover's kiss branded on the nipple. Feeding time is how your son would know his father and bask by salty water on the sand where your lover left the blueprint of his touch. But this didn't impress him much. Child called a bastard, mama's boy who didn't have a man to send him to the corner for cigarettes or beer. And so the rage. He sliced open cats and tossed their skulls into the surf to bob like flotsam. When one washed ashore one day, you wondered at the shell that looked like a severed kitten head. But then you discovered that it was, and that is when you sank into the sand as if the weight of your child's crime had fallen on you suddenly. You should have known then that he would grow to be a man who would tire of his old and now disabled mother, who could be so easily dispatched by boat, just another catch thrown back to sea. Instead, you waved at him among the group of children playing soccer on the beach. His body dark and slim as all of the others. When one of them waved back, you said, yes, it must be him. And just as easily you tell yourself it isn't him, this man who rows this boat by night. No, it isn't him, heartless fisherman ignoring this burdened woman, gasping glassy-eyed beneath a starry sky. What will your father say, you plead? I have no father, he responds, and you blush, remembering the day you were a girl collecting clams when a man came galloping on a horse into the shore. How he said you wouldn't get pregnant if you loved inside the sea, your pubic hair flowing like moss as he dug into your hip bone, to secure his pearl. And when you started sweating brine into the sheets, he left his picture and a promise to return. And suddenly, you see him there inside your son, liar, thief, coward, trickster, sorry shadow, what could have been a man. Oh, parasite, you say, oh, putrid fish gut, how dare you after all these years? You rise to strike him, but he pushes you into the black and says, I have no mother either. So this will be the first time I actually read, before reading from this book, Black Blossoms. So it's a debut, just as a book for Amanda. This first one is called Weimar, and it's actually inspired by, I went to the museum to see the painting of the Weimar Republic, which is a period in Germany right before the rise of Hitler. And there were these quite striking, beautiful paintings, and one of them by the painter Otto Dix was called The Dancer Anita Berber, 1925. And I would describe the painting within the poem. So I guess it would be an ekphrastic poem. Weimar. Strawberries are just as shameless, flaunting their freckles in daylight, making believe they entice us because they're strawberries and not because they look like nipples. They say she knew the cut in her toe would start to bleed when she pressed her foot to the stage, her ex-lover in the front row, seeking evidence that she still loved him. The autobiography of Red begs a coda when the hand twitches the moment the paint runs out, and the second hand, the one holding the brush, provokes a stigmata. She likes her women to flush in the usual places, yes, the cheeks, the chest, the valley of the mound, but nothing tickles her more than their palms growing warm on her back. They say she could detect a woman who had just miscarried by the smell of dry fruit escaping in the woman's breath, by the silence in her step, the crib coming to a stop. On the streets of Berlin, the walls shrink back like stomachs kicked in, and people toss in their sleep like forks in the sink. All night, the clanging sweats on the canvas. A bath after midnight cools the burning in her calves, but she soaks inside another dilemma. Will she set her throat on fire with whiskey or with a dark-eyed neighbor? The secret to the perfect angle is to use blades instead of bristles, is to carve a jaw the way one would cut into a birthday cake with knowledge of one's mortality. They say she could bend and suck up the diamond in her navel to her nostril, not because she was flexible, but because she had the pull of a tornado in her nose. Red, he said, because there was no other way to keep her still, this devil that slipped out of every dress except for the one that coated her skin after her body sliced open. War as woman is what it should be called, this dress stretched open like a battlefield, this arsenal of fingertips and bullet kiss, this bloody bed with a skull rising through it. My name is Anita Berber, and I no longer dance for anyone. but I'll keep my eye on you, you who will pirouette like smoke through the crack of the world. I'm also a book critic, and I remember one time I was reviewing a book of poetry written by Mexican poets, and I noticed that many of these poems were dedicated to important figures, politicians, other artists, other poets. And after a while, after about like 50 pages, I got really tired of it. I said, you know, whatever happened to something a little more frivolous, like dedicating a poem to, I don't know, Lizzie Borden. Right? And as soon as I said that, that was it. The curse was out in the air. And of course, I had to write my poem for Lizzie Borden. Mise en scène. You are not a woman. You are not a ghost or the shrill that makes the neighbor's hounds abort. You are not a space between buildings, not a wind tunnel or porthole through which the indigent cat slips in and out of its coma. You aren't the hermetic door with its back to the street. You are not the echo of the cracking of wood, but the footfalls mimicking distance as they spiral down to the dark hole of the center. You are not the center. You are not the interruption of the window surprising the postman as he skips into the mailbox once more. Every person in this house has died. You buried your mother with a plum pin in her throat. You buried your father without his hair or his shoes. You buried the hair inside the shoes. The shoes behave like flower pots and wait for the moss to grow. What does a creature do in the tar pits of its own extinction but lift its tusks to the heavens to pierce its own wail? You are no less dead than the parakeet that gnaws at the chips of paint. Father said to keep it in its cage, but you want something else to die before you hand over the room to your corpse and disintegrate like the stack of father's photographic magazines in the fireplace. You are not the immolation. You are not the woman pressing the shriek to the page, but you know about turning black limb by limb. You know about finding a smile on the mantle and detaching its skull. You buried your father without his teeth. You buried your father the night he wanted to step inside you, the way he enters the house. You are not the dress that opens from the outside like an iron gate. You're not the stupid woman with her fingers shoved inside her mouth. When she goes up in flames into the fruit bowl. You are not the fire. You are not the bowl. You are not the reason the parakeet sputters down to the floor in a trail of smoke. This is not your bird, and this is not your house. You are not the screeching sirens. No, you are not the owner. He disappeared into the mattress and left his bones. You're not the daughter. You're not the spouse. She's in the kitchen. She can't get out. You're not the poison in the soup. You're not the knife or gun or noose. You're not at home. And this is not your burning house. It doesn't get any easier. Dead woman's jewelry at an estate sale. Have you been to these? The estate sales? Have you been to these? Oh. They're kind of creepy, right? I mean, basically what it is that somebody, somebody dies and their home just opened up to become an instant garage sale, right? I mean, the descendants don't really care, and they pick whatever is valuable, and they leave everything that now has no value. It says a lot about what we collect, right? But somebody else has to find value in those pieces. But it's something very creepy about that. And I remember going to one, with a friend of mine would go and try to find these hidden treasures in the estate sales. And I remember just sitting there in this woman's bed and watching another woman go through the jewelry, and I thought, wow, this is like, we have permission to be thieves and pilferers and intruders in other people's lives. But, I mean, that's the great thing about it. What happens to your belongings when you're done? Dead woman's jewelry at an estate sale. Mrs. Drummond summons up a cemetery for the woman who owns the earrings she's about to buy. She's an old woman too, and she knows about the clutter of hooks, wires, beads. Stones like these don't even fool themselves and wear the adhesive off in public parks, where the scavenger birds pick at their senseless vanity. The dead lady left behind so much jewelry, yet Mrs. Drummond suspects she was buried with modest studs because Here, she stands before a mirror, modeling the gaudier legacy of her collection. A woman like this, whose closet cascades, belts with lackluster buckles, no longer reigns supreme over a kingdom of sequins and glitter. The retired army of her mules and flaps rejects the discipline of symmetrical formation. Mrs. Drummond might have seen her on the street some months ago before her death, a pale lady spending her strength to hold up a white wig, and Mrs. Drummond might have smirked, knowing she would outlive her, a small accomplishment, no doubt, but one of the few she has left. That, and picking out a matching pair in silver to complement that white blouse she brought back from Cuernavaca, a place with a Camposanto, where white people were buried as long as 60 years ago. Their names, Mormon, Lacey, Hart, no longer foreign, but right at home among the mauve and peach mausoleums, cherubs with clipped wings, a tile so blue it invites the beetles to dip their suckers for a drink. She strolled along the faith of tombs, peeked through the windows of wreath, traced the odd writing on stone. Even the spear-headed gladiolus looked baroque in its sparse flowering. She might have seen similar sadness on a tarot card. And yet there was festivity in every upright monument, as if nobody took that line down. There is where a collector of bright things belongs, sunning her entire grave above ground. After all this rummage, Mrs. Drummond decides on a pair shaped like seashells. She feels a draft and amuses herself. Has she fooled the dead woman's husband, ghost, enough to make him whisper in her ear because she brought back from the dead an owner for these earrings for another month or two, perhaps a year? As she buys her basket full of trinkets, Mrs. Drummond takes comfort in knowing that death appreciates the flashy cloth and ornate medals down in Mexico. When her skull bleeds through her scalp, south is where she too will want to go. Let me just two more. This is a retelling of one of the Grimm brothers' myths. I'm not sure how much more Grimm I could make it. I mean, Anne Sexton did the transformations, and they're quite fun if you like that kind of stuff. And so this is a challenge that we're given to choose one of the myths and to retell it in a different way. And I chose the girl with no hands, and you'll hear the myth in here. Or the story. I don't know, the fairy tale. You'll hear the fairy tale in there. The girl with no hands. Your father asked for more than a polka dot tie, a self-portrait in Crayola, or cinnamon snickerdoodles flat as candle stubs on the baking sheet. He grabbed you by the wrists and severed your hands to wear in his keychain like a pair of lucky rabbit's feet. What's so fortunate about a rabbit hopping about the prairie with a missing limb? What if all four of its legs have been clipped? It is only as far as it can stretch its neck and then rolls itself on its back to perforate its star's belly with the blades of its ribs. When the hunter returns, the rabbit will have its revenge, looking like the amputated foot of his diabetic mother wearing the familiar bunny slipper. Your father seized your hands, not out of malice, but greed, his wish to match Midas in the pocket and pocket the small gold of his kingdom, Rolex, wedding bands, crucifix, and the precious treasures of your rings, which, little princess, will never leave your fingers because Papi breaks no promises. He never abandoned you either, always there when you see the hairbrush perched on the bristle of the nesting pecker. Resolute, you age with ingenuity, learning to eat right off the branch, nibbling apple, apricot, and pear without separating fruit from stem. This is how you heard about the clever rabbit from the hunter's son, who made love to you, pressing his fist to the small of his back. He rocked you against a tree trunk, and your shoulders splintered the bark. What a miracle of an instrument, the piano that's played with elbows and knees and four clumsy heels that for all their random reaching make the sweetest rhythms. Your bodies danced each afternoon in the grove while your mother sewed in the mysterious tears in your dresses. You forgave your mother's inactivity the night when Papi struck down your wrist with a cleaver, the mirror of the metal like a window to a furnace, the shadow puppet butterfly emancipated finally. Who knew chopped bone could sing? Maybe chicken doesn't utter a note at its beheading because its mother hen isn't near enough to cluck a frenzied requiem. Your mother squealed as fiercely as a sow, and your stumps looked like the bloody snouts of swine. But all that rage escapes you now as you unleash the power of the hand your father left intact, and with it grip your lover tiger into you. So this is delectable defiance, Miss Rabbit. It must have been a female to claim the last word. You, girl with no hands, can produce another pair and more, legs, torso, head, and a bear trap of a jaw to bite the hands that feed her. Now I do this. There's a poem that my sister actually asked me to write, and then she had the other dead author, and she wanted one of my poems on there, so I wrote a poem for her. And then the next time I visited her, I noticed there were a couple of words that were like crossed out in the altar. And you'll figure out which ones she crossed out, because she said she wasn't there, that these words were there. But something censored about my own sister. You know, what's that about? You'll figure out which are the words. No mystery. Flor de muerto, flor de fuego. Cempasúchil, marigold, flower, the scent of cold knuckles delights you, as does the answer to death's riddles. What's the girth of the hermit's tongue once it retreats into the throat and settles like a tea bag? What complaints do feet make when they tire pointing up and fold flat like a fan of poker cards? Where do the dead hide the humor of the ass crack when the buttocks unstring their fat? When you sprung to the earth, all other colors coughed and gave you the gift of sickbed sullenness and the contagious texture of tragedy. Once there was a widow who exchanged her heart for your head, but you outgrew her body, protruding from her chest like an unsightly tumor. Despite that, she carried you, cradling you in her hand during Mass, a solace in the memory of her husband's scrotum. If she heard a hymn in your petals, it was the sound of trousers unzipping. If she could name the smell inside the folds of your corolla, she kept the word wet against her tongue. The widow held you tighter then, so you stung her palm in protest, and then crumbled when she flung you like a shooting star, all awesome art and damned glory of evisceration. To pay her back, you pierced the shivering heart she left balanced on your stem. You loved her all over again because she turned yellow with death, because she was like you, something dry to come undone in pieces in the pitted ground. Flor de muerto, flor de fuego, you humbled down life like a last ember. Even the phoenix tired of sewing its bird bones together and could not live you, O mortality muse, O end. Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce Amanda Auchter. About 1 year ago, I was sitting in a beloved Central Park in New York City with a stack of paper. Each unit of paper was a project, a manuscript offered as evidence of artistic labor. My task was to sift through the manuscripts and to distinguish one above all others as worthy of publication. It never fails to astound me how hours expended on energy and creativity and, yes, even heartache can be compressed into this generic gathering of pages, neatly arranged and familiar only because of its easily recognizable dimensions, uninteresting except for the sentiment behind its existence, an extraordinary combination of dream and expectation, the wish to transition from manuscript to book. To be honest, I was expecting an uneven experience. Mediocrity shuffled into above-average projects only because I had been a screener or a judge for poetry contests countless times before. But after the first read, I became alarmed. The dozen or so manuscripts I had just read were all publishable and excellent on their individual terms. But even among this group of excellent manuscripts, one warranted the distinction I was enlisted to award, and that was Amanda Auchter's manuscript, which would later be renamed The Glass Crib. First impression, I was so stunned by the perfection, poem after poem, that I was seized by a great anxiety. The bar for the poetry contest was indeed high, and I worried about my own students and their clunky novice verse, and I thought, my God, these kids are never going to get published. But once that anxiety abated, I said to myself, of course they will get published if they work as hard as Amanda Auchter, for indeed this manuscript stayed with me as I traveled the subway back home, and as I rose the next day to report to my students that poetry was alive and well in the contest circuit. The word I kept going back to was perfection. Amanda's work had all the necessary elements and more of great poetry: impressive music, original metaphor, flawless structures, and genuine emotion. I was moved by the speaker's struggles to configure various relationships, to her mother, to her body, to her spirituality, to her desires. She gravitated toward the narratives of survival and womanhood, and gave direction and orientation to loss and love, helplessness and hope. The Glass Crib is a stunning example of artistry, a book of devastating beauty, beauty used as a vehicle not for disguise, but for transcendence. The offer of mercy this book gives its readers, because it asks us to enter the fragile rooms of memory and dream. It has been a year since I read Amanda Auchter's lines, but that first encounter in Central Park, New York has remained unforgettable. I can tell you that I was sitting on a green bench on the famous literary walk with the statues of Robert Burns and William Shakespeare. I can tell you that it was a sunny afternoon and that a young juggler was spinning around as he tossed 3 spears into the air. I sat there like one of Amanda's poems, suspended in the glory of sophisticated language and dizzying possibility. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the winner of Zone 3 Press First Book Award, Amanda Auchter.
Thank you so much, Rigoberto. I want to put that in my pocket for whenever I'm really stressed out and listen to that amazing introduction. Thank you so much, Susan and Roz and Gumtree, and all of you guys being here. It's such a treat to be here, and Tennessee is amazing. So I'm going to just go ahead and start, because when I sit at poetry readings, I'm just wanting to listen and then get out. So I'm going to, I know how you are. So anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and start. It looks like I have a lot of poems, but they're really actually short, so don't look at the flags and be like, oh my God, I'm going to be here and something will come. So this first poem I'm going to read is called Possible Beginning. My birth mother unties the strings of her bikini top on a striped beach towel, lights her cigarette, flicks ashes into the muddy gulf. When she wakes the next morning, brown skin, hungover in bed, with a man who brings her aspirin, tomato juice, his fingers to her lips, I am still the sand grain stuck inside her from the day before. The chance of long legs, allergies, a larger left breast. Each time she kisses him, she thinks, please God. Thinks of her forgotten pill, the condom, the possible beginning of fingernails, nostrils, knees. Of her name called over and over, his breath, her body on fire, the idea of face and knuckle, the small mouth she will push away. This next poem I'm going to read is called Jacobet, and I'm very interested in voice, and I'm very interested in persona. Persona poems, for those of you who don't know, are poems written in the voice of someone else. who is not yourself. And I wanted to find some kind of parallel to go along with the theme of, women and motherhood and, babies given, for adoption or given away. And of course, the story of Moses is about as original, as you can get, going back to the first baby in basket, so to speak. But I was really more interested in Moses' mother, who I did some research and found her name was Yocheved, and her story, and her voice, like how she met, or as she was giving away Moses, what she would say to him. So this poem is called Yocheved. Months of water and milk and ache, and I am pushing it all through the sunlight, the bulrushes coated in pitch. The small fig of you, fists and mouth, red pit of your heart. Where I once shaded your face from the white sun, the reeds will keep you cool. From a distance, you are an unprotected nest, dark pebble swaddled of papyrus, my floating field. As you grow older, do not imagine me, you will never get it right. A crowd will come and there will be women. I will not be the one at the jar, the one pressing olives into oil. If I pass you on the street, if I'm the woman who sells you a basket of dates, if I am still beautiful, if you hear yourself in my voice, if my hands are yours, do not reach back to touch me. I have nothing left to give you. This is called A Late Blooming. In the months before I was born, before breathing, light, despair, no one knew of the me inside you, my body barely weighable in pounds, my fingers catching your ribs. For months you fed me air, vodka, saltines, small unnoticeable meals, enough for you to gain just 10 pounds of water, the pale tissues of my heartbeat and bones, enough for lips, knees, eyelids, for nothing to change in your life. Your green sweater, your favorite blue jeans, hugged your new curves, which to your mother was a late blooming, your new, larger breasts, the glow of your skin, your dark, brilliant hair. In the hours before the end of our lives together, you were the scrape of a wooden chair, a dropped dish, loud, hard breaths, a damp dress, the surprised look on your mother's face. I want to think of you better than you were, your hands touching your pink round skin, your freckled arm. Before the caseworker entered that bright white room, before you pushed through the doors and out into the February dusk, I want to think of how you spoke to me when you thought no one was listening. The next poem I'm going to read, actually, funnily enough, and this is going to sound really cheesy and cliche, but that's okay. This is actually called Poem for the Adoptive Mother, and my mother's super supportive of my writing and everything I become, and I kind of wanted to in some way pay her back, and she loves reading all my poems, even the bad ones. And so I wanted to write her a poem for Mother's Day. And so this was actually the poem I wrote her for Mother's Day, and coincidentally, it fit into the context of the book. So this is a poem for the adoptive mother. When the caseworker opened the file and said, "This will be difficult," did you imagine my whole fist around your finger? Did you hold the photograph and think of how small I was, my entire weight fitting into your palms? Difficult, your already busy life. 6 kids, husband, an outgrown house. At 42, was there something in those papers that made you want to do it again? I want to remember your approach, your echo of sensible flats down the hospital corridor, the blue doll dress you took me home in, the plastic rattle, your Polaroid snap. How when you said to me years later, I knew when I saw you. I want to think of myself reaching for your bright mouth, for your turquoise necklace, everything I could get my hands on. This next poem actually actually comes out of two places. In my research, I always research when I'm writing my books, even if I'm writing about myself or other people. One, because I'm a nerd, and two, I want to get it right. And this comes out of two places. One, it begins with an epigraph from The Surrendered Child, which I'll read in a minute, which is a book about birth mothers. It's all like the testimonies of different birth mothers giving their children away for adoption. And then the other one is, this actually came out of a phone conversation I had with my own birth mother. We spoke like one time on the phone, which was very bizarre. And so this is kind of like a combination of what I had read about other birth mothers and then in speaking with my own. So this is Tether, and this is the epigraph, which is from Karen McElmurray from the book Surrendered Child. I can't seem to love anyone, one birth mother said. It's like I'm already in love, she said, with someone I'll never meet. Tether. How much we give up for this unnameable thing. Love without face, without name. Love a nest filled with bones, umbilicus, fingernails. Affliction. In her voice, my birth mother is 18 again, a bird fluttering in pain. An ocean inside her, my foot against spine. I'm tasting the bright air, reach for any part of her before she lets go. The knotty hair between her legs, wrists, breasts. She listens as I make her into paper dolls kept in a suitcase under my childhood bed. How I name each one Catherine. Look in shopping malls, the post office. For a woman with dark curls, my mouth. When we speak, I want to tether her with my red yarn tongue, say, I'm waiting. I've been waiting. Her body, a house burning in a distant field, smoke rising between us. Love, the rafters thick with soot. I'm waiting, reliable as the silence exploding between us, our lives without each other, a door we do not open. The next couple of poems I'm going to read are actually from the central part of the book. The book actually began, I was talking to Blaz's class today, and the book began, my sister was involved in a car accident right before I started actually working on the manuscript. She was hit by a drunk driver, and she was in a coma for 6 weeks. She lived, thankfully. I didn't know what I was going to write about, and I came home Christmas Eve, and I read an article in Poetry magazine about the poet and writer, I forgot her name right now. Mary Carr, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry for the long day. Mary Carr's conversion to Catholicism. And it really, something about that really struck me, and this whole idea of like faith and life and death and, you know, the big topics, if you will. So a couple of these poems, you know, come from around that time. So this is called Visiting Hour. What you want is to hold her, press her back into you. Hear her say, this is how dying is, my breath slipping under everywhere at once. See the balloon you brought, how it lifts and sags. This is what I've become on the other side. Pray to the sheet you wrap her in, the knot of her fist against her heart, that you can set the glass back into the windshield, brown bottle into its paper bag. Feel this in her swallow of air, the machines hum, everything, the dawn blooms with her. And this next one is called Without. Little sister, sleep or whatever it means to be without the mind the body. You are still the earthly sun, the unbroken glass. You are still the wax bird you once drew flying from the car window. You are the sprouting grass. When your small fingers birded the paper sky years before, when your mouth was full of popsicle or crackers instead of rugged gravel, did you know how you would later smash head first into that December cold? How your body would hit the wet earth in the field? Little sister, I am drawing your bird swirls and your stick fingers waving back. Your face, the black O's of your eyes looking up. This one is called Nothing But the Shape. In that light you could no longer see, the light on the soap dish, the bottles of cologne and shampoo. I wanted to touch your hair, feel you on the floor, your last breath. From the doorway, it didn't look like you, face turned toward the clothes hamper, one foot kicked into the garbage can, hands still clutching your blue toothbrush. Mouth slack, eyes open to counter, tile, ceiling. How is it that I've forgotten how many years your body has become white roots, a box of ash? At times, you fill the room I walk into, the smell of you, as though you've been there rocking in a chair, reading, never dead, but waiting for me to enter with a basket of laundry, a plate of fruit, some toy you left behind that we've both outgrown. My hello, nothing but the shape my mouth takes, the air you feel when you press your fingers to my lips. This next poem I'm going to read is called The Bottom Drawer, and it's sort of a companion poem to the one that I just read. My brother died when I was 16. I was actually the one who found him. He had a terminal illness. And, as is common when, there's a death in the immediate family, usually one of the parents responds in one way and another parent responds in another. And my mother kept my brother's clothes. I think she actually still has some. That's a really long time. And I remember going into her room, pilfering through her stuff when I was like 16, looking for a lipstick or just something that I was going to take from her room. And I came across my brother's pajamas, and I was, struck with how sad and how strange that was at the same time. So this is the bottom drawer. Tucked beneath my mother's shirts and camisoles, a paper bag of prayer cards, I find my brother's pajamas. I want to take them out, understand how she can spend an afternoon in an empty house with them. Her at the table with a cup of tea, raising the sleeve to her cheek, her nose, thinking of him, how she kissed his stubble cheek, closed each eyelid. I wonder if she wears them, or how often, if at night she slips into bed with the shirt, cradles him back into her. I unfold them on the bed for her to find, spread out as though he was still there, brushing his teeth, water running in the bathroom, a blue towel shook dry. Each arm uncrossed and flattened, the flannel pants draped over the bed, as though someone meant to wear them, but chose something else instead. When I was in graduate school, I went to Bennington College for graduate school. They have a low residency MFA program that's very good. Halfway through the program, I feel like I'm talking about tragedy a lot, and I'm really a happy person. Halfway through the program's founder and director, Liam Rector, who's an excellent poet, committed suicide. And he had struggled with cancer on and off, and he suddenly committed suicide during that. And a lot of the students who went to the program, in the days and weeks and months after, wrote a lot of, beyond suicide poems, which, I understand trying to get through your grief, and I swore up and down that I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to write one, and I didn't for a really long time, because I felt like, it's too soon. I didn't know him that well. I hadn't actually even been one of his students. I'd only had maybe a handful of conversations with him. And then suddenly one night, like 3.5 years later or something, it just all of a sudden I was taking a shower and the poem started writing itself in my head. And this is the thundering. Late August, and you are a cigarette burn in radio-lit dusk. The availability of means, cold steel on your tongue. Your mouth fills with what becomes massive history, hole in the throat, your punctured brain on a back wall. Your name rain-smeared, inking the street, every floor you've walked. Beside the door, a pair of shoes, an umbrella, your black coat, things and minutes you will no longer need, carry with you. In the white noise of fan hum, car horns, you roll bullets in your palm. You want for a moment to still this, a book left open on the table, the ring light, cool coffee in a glass pot. The first sign is early waking, the failure of sleep. The last is how you sit in your green chair and write your name at the end of a page, crush paper and ash into a bowl. You move in and out of air. The thundering dark calls you. Close the window. My mother is extremely Catholic. And every time something happens to me, she's always like, offer it up, all the time, offer it up. And she's one of these mothers, like I always say that she should have been like a Jewish mother, just because of the way she is. And literally she has no sympathy at all whatsoever. She's like, anytime something happens, she's either offered up or she's like, at least you don't have 10 kids and your husband's out of work or whatever, which she's never experienced, by the way. So this one is called Offer It Up. Offer it up, my mother says from the receiver, the mailbox. Offer it up, the long line at the bank, the sleepless night. Each time I lock myself out of the house, offer it. For the door I could not open, the ruining rain, the flat tire, the burned tongue, the wine-stained dress. That too, and the dark I am still afraid of, my glass split foot, the splinter, the flood-swirled street, this yard of debris. Offer. For the mother who gave me life, then left with her purse and car keys while I palmed the glass crib. The man who handed me a box of sweaters and photo albums, then showed me the door. This too. For my sister who almost died, my brother that did, that each time I felt the loss of a letter or a person, I could strike my knees to the floor and give it all back to the God who asked me to bear it. Several of the poems in here are what I call like martyred saint poems. For a while, I was kind of obsessed with the martyred female saints. I read a lot of books of poems, and they always deal with, Jesus or the apostles, and I felt there was kind of a hole in here about, the women. And I thought that was a little unfair. And so my mother, of course, gave me this giant book on like the female saints that I poured over with strange curiosity about how they died. And one that struck me was St. Agatha, who, there's a famous painting, I forgot who did it, but for years and years, I mean, literally centuries, people thought that, I'm sure you've seen it, she's like holding a tray, and everybody thought it was like bread or cupcakes, but they're actually her breasts on the tray, because she had her breasts cut off. They were trying to force her to speak with, I think, the king, and she wouldn't. She wanted to like maintain her purity for God, and they did terrible, terrible things to her. But I was really interested in not only that story about, this pain of the bodily, and overcoming that with, the spirit, but also this idea of how, for centuries people thought she was carrying around cupcakes, but it's actually her breasts. So this is the martyrdom of St. Agatha. The knife forgets my body. Somewhere in a field it rots in the hand that held it. I was buried tasting the earth. I was buried with each breast cut off. I carried them, each a bright bell, a pink bloom, a pearl of dust, my ruined chest. Imagine a mouth filled with desire and I would not open. My legs, my body shut. How the iron hooks dug my skin and pulled me toward every window. The wooden horse, my strapped wrists, still bone on bone refusing. Then the knife, my flesh spooled in its rusted light. My breast held up like loaves of bread, like two cakes that stopped rising. Rigoberto, I'm going to dedicate this to you. It sounds hard to hear on Okay, this is actually the original end of the book, or the manuscript when I sent it to Rigoberto, and we kind of have gone back and forth on, the ending and what I wanted as the ending. And I'm glad to say that it ends now, but this is the original ending, and then I will review, to close, the last poem that's the official ending now. So this is the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, which is after the sculpture by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, which is pretty amazing and very striking and kind of creepy. The story of St. Teresa, she was a little nutty if you want to look at it from like one hand. She was either like absolutely holy or really insane. And she actually wrote a lot of journals about her visions. you can go and look at. She wrote like a memoir. And in a lot of the visions, she saw the angel Gabriel putting a spear basically in her, and it was very hot, and it filled her with the Holy Spirit. And so the sculpture by Bernini is a depiction of St. Teresa being pierced by the spear or the fire of the Holy Spirit. So this is the ecstasy of St. Teresa. There is no pain but the bodily, nothing less than the long spear, the gold iron dagger. The light descends its wing of fire into my heart. A small moan of flames rises from my throat, my ember-stung lungs. Before the arrow, I saw its shadow, saw its thorn, my face and its bright approach. No distance between my breast and its piercing the flamed tip. The sleep of God, the quiet filling of my body with suns. Leave me now to breathe the white embers. Leave me all on fire. Actually, I have two more, sorry. This one, I had gone in, sort of around and around about putting it in. But I ultimately did because I felt it was really important. It was sort of, I guess, like the last poem that made it into the final version of the manuscript. If any of you have ever been to Texas, which is where I'm from, several years ago, my husband and I took a trip to San Antonio where they have a lot of missions, which are quite spectacular. And this one mission we went into was the mission San Jose, which is still actually in operation as a church. It also has like a museum of the old mission, which is really pretty neat. They have a famous like rose wall, which was this man who was an immigrant had carved roses into it for his wife. There's this great story with it. But they have a little chapel that's very beautiful and very small and very rustic looking. And if you've ever been to an old Catholic church, they have like the big candles and you can light one for the dead or whatever. And the year before, I had found my paternal birth family, and I found out that my birth father had died right after my second birthday. And so, I was still coming to terms with who these other people are that I know but I don't know, and that my birth father died so long ago, and all of this stuff. And so we went into this church, and I had written most of the manuscript before that, but I just had this one moment alone and in the chapel, and my husband was outside taking pictures, and I decided to light a candle for my birth father, this person that I didn't ever know, but I sort of wanted to spend some quiet time thinking about. So this is called Lighting the Candles. Let me speak to you now, you who belong to the whitewashed frescoes, roses carved into crumbled stone. You who have no face left, not even in memory, no voice, no hands to lift to my eyes. Here in the soot-shrouded chapel, I touch sand, wooden stem, flame, make you again of light, my burned thread of hair caught in the blue votive. I light the dark wick, give this offering a name. I give you the sweat of my body in early August heat, the silver roots of dusk between us, the coin slid into the empty metal box. I want to keep you to myself inside my mouth, watch your smoke drift over the lip of the cross-cut cup, stain the walls. Let no one enter this room, open the doors, stand beside me in grief, strike the match. Listen for my breath, how each word comes from you, an echo of this burnt prayer rising through the high arched windows. I'm going to end with this. This is actually the last poem in the book. I actually like this story. I think it's really interesting. I'm like kind of a story collector. I don't know why. I just love stories. And this one actually comes from the British Beekeepers Association. And there's this legend about the tears of the crucified Christ turning into bees and flying into the world to bring sweetness, which I thought was a really neat and weird story. So this one is called Bring Splendor. Made of dirt and pulse, the body's flare, the flesh that forgives thorn with the striking hand. Made of eyelash, sun, the whole of the body transfigured. Drink of wing beats, dark storm, a trick of lighting. to which the air fills with living, with sugar, with reviviscence. Go forth, beauty, birds that blossom, sweetness. Made of sky, bring stingers, the form of tongues of fire. Bring dawn over stones, over the awakened heart. Bring splendor, the last rising breath. Every question of death, a desire. Go forth, a field, a dizzying cloud. Thank you.
And meet the authors and maybe purchase their books and have some snacks. I think we have some. All right, thank you.